This is a Dalarna University production.
I will start off by introducing the panel, although I believe many of you have met all of these four distinguished members of the closing panel during these days. First off, we have Terry Anderson representing Athabasca University. And then we have Patrik Zakrisson from Pearson. We have Margareta Hellström from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. And we have Andrew Casson from Dalarna University. So Terry representing the keynotes, or a keynote. Patrik representing a commercial company. And Margareta from KTH, the co-host of the conference. And of course, Andrew from Dalarna hosting this conference these days. So, I'm going to kick this off. And I would like to turn to Margareta first. The Next Generation Learning Conference and Next Generation Learning is one of maybe many terms that we have used over the years to try to describe what we see in the future for education. But thinking of next generation learning in a broader context, is it important, in your opinion, to talk about a next generation of learning? And if so, yes, and if not, yeah, elaborate.
I think that it is important to talk about next generation learning, at least in Sweden at the moment. And not talk about, for instance, distance learning or online learning or blended learning, which are all concepts that have something, attached to them. And we're really talking about using the best methods for the right things, to enhance learning, using technology when that is the best, and doing, having conversations with each other when we meet, instead of looking at teachers' lectures that we could actually look on online instead. And maybe there would be the best lectures in the world instead that we would choose online. And then we have the discussions when we meet. Also, I think that the next generation learning is important to start to talk about. And what is it? I think maybe it's already here, or I would say it is already here. But in little islands, in lighted islands. And we need good examples, we need to get these good examples up in the air. We need also open educational practices, show each other what we do, what works, what don't work, and learn from each other in a much more open way than has been the common thing until now in higher education.
Anyone else in the panel wanting to jump in here?
Well, perhaps I could just refer to a short discussion we had early this morning on the actual concept of next generation learning. I think one of the speakers, Bo Sundgren, said he thought it came from the States. He'd Googled or found it in there, but it didn't. It actually came from a discussion we had here internally in the university a few years ago. And the original concept was new generation learning, until actually the person who is now the chair of our university board said that new always turns into old quite quickly, so call it next instead. So that's where it comes. And I think, having used it for a few years now, it's very useful. It's Mädchen für alles, and it's just sort of nebulous enough to be able, unclear in its outline, to be able to cover what we all mean, but we're not quite sure what it means, and yet it can develop all the time. So I think it's been useful. It's not a good concept. It's certainly not a definable concept, but it's useful.
Yeah. I would agree. Someone said that the future is already here. We just don't know exactly who is actually doing what we will be doing in the future. And I think most people in this room already see parts of the future and are already doing this best practice that we want to make sure that everybody is doing. So I guess now is the it's time to implement it on a wider scale. What we already know and the research we already have about good practice and using ICT to support education. So it's just a matter of how fast the implementation will be and how dramatic the change could be. Maybe not dramatic at all. Maybe it's just very naturally it's going to grow on us, or maybe it's going to be dramatic for coming from a publisher. I think it's going to be more dramatic for some commercial players, because what people will require of a publisher will be very different in the future, and we don't define ourselves as a publisher anymore. We define us as an educational service provider, which is very important to kind of open our minds in what we need to do to support the next generation learning.
I think it's a good term because, first of all, it never comes. There's always going to be a next generation, and it really has power in saying that we're not going to finish at any particular time. But it also implies that things are and can change, and we've had major problems at universities with change in general. And so I think this is really, it does give an urgency about change that I like. So it's good.
Thank you. Anyone from the audience wanting to maybe ask a follow-up question or elaborate on your thoughts here on next generation learning as a concept or as a phenomenon? Huh? Yes. Perfect. My football coach says I'm missing a lot of practice for this. So.
Yeah. One thing I thought only shouldn't we distinguish more between learning and teaching? Shouldn't it be clearer than next generation learning is one thing, next generation teaching will hopefully support that in an optimal, in a very good way, but every person in this society knows that there's a difference between teaching and learning, and that teaching is not necessarily identical with learning, etc. But we kind of don't want to talk about teaching, and I think things can become blurry by this only. Well, it's a remark. Only so.
Well, any comments on that remark? It's okay if you have.
I think that teaching is very important to also acknowledge, and I think the problem here we have is actually with the leadership of the universities that don't really evaluate teaching as much as we'd hope to. And if there is no carrots at all, why should teachers really make an effort? So I think that this is very important too. Although we tend to always say, no, it's not about teaching, it's all about learning. But the teacher is very important, and I think we've heard lots of people talking about that and having evidence from that today and yesterday and all these days we've been here.
Okay, so following up on that, as you said, we've seen many good examples, and we've probably seen a few of the best practices that we will note as part of the future. With these many good ideas and examples, how do we move forward to make sure that it doesn't just stay interesting ideas and examples at a 3-day conference in Dalarna? How do we follow up an initiative like this, or any other conference for that matter?
Well, I think that we need to, incorporate some of the innovations that we've seen, trying them in our classrooms in personal ways, right in the multiple contexts that we work. But I think what we have to do, though, is start building research agenda around these innovations that we've seen, such that you can end up getting published and it can go on your CV and all that. And if there's one thing I was thinking about this conference, is there were some very interesting presentations and lots of innovations, but there was very little hard data presented by at least the sessions that I was in, and not just quantitative data, but even qualitative in a systematic way. And even the member of parliament, what she talked about, evidence-based, and I know that's kind of overused term for medicine, but there is some value, I think, in being more serious about the kind of innovations that we do, such that we can grow as scholars and we can start developing the scholarship of teaching and learning, and making it so that when we complain that our leaders don't evaluate it, well, we don't give them much to evaluate, like we do with the research output that's easily measured. So.
Okay. Anyone want to follow up on that?
I think it's also a leadership issue, both in national terms and institutional terms. We have all these islands, as you say, Margareta, but to be able to do something over the whole board in the long run, then we do need leaders in higher education who are willing to admit that this is one of the key issues for the future. And we're definitely not there yet in Sweden, apart from some islands, of course.
So one thing I'm very interested in is the distinction between top-down interventions and bottom-up transformations. And it seems to me a lot of the discourse around this conference there's a sort of an implicit assumption that change is going to result as a result of the decisions of policymakers, university leaders, centralized computer services, government ministers, etc. And actually, certainly from my empirical work, it seems that real systemic change is being driven from the bottom up, and it's being driven by the change in practices of students and learners themselves. So when you're saying that, we've done a lot, but there's a long way to go, I don't think that as a statement, I think wouldn't make much sense. If you actually looked at what a lot of young people are doing on a day-to-day basis and the way they're using social media to create context, to source information, to connect with other people who share their interests and stuff, you would develop a very different picture and possibly become more sensitized to the disconnect between what students are actually, how they're using new media in all sorts of interesting ways, and what's going on in slightly more formal, sort of structured educational context. And so it's that sort of tension or the disconnect between the way technologies are used within institutional context and how they're used in a more sort of open, exploratory way, where students, the locus of control resides with the learner outside of structured educational context, that I think is a critical issue that needs to be sort of understood. And I'd agree with, I think, a point Ros made this morning about the real bottleneck to sort of releasing the potential of new technologies in more structured educational context is evaluation. Because any education system will ultimately prepare students to pass the tests that the institution has set. So in a sense, we're all in the business of teaching to the test. And even if you have progressive educators who do more sort of progressive, exploratory kind of work, they ultimately have to, the evaluation criteria set by the institution ultimately defines the kind of pedagogies that can operate within that system. So, and I don't think we're really going to see real change within institutional context until we negotiate that issue. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts or responses to that.
Well, let me just take you up on it, if I may, Joachim, on the first part of that, because obviously I agree with you that it's the learners, the students that are driving change, but what's happening here is that a large part of the universities are in opposition, in more or less active opposition to that change, and are not adopting in the fashion that they might to make the most of those changes and those opportunities and possibilities that have arisen. So that's why I'm saying it's a leadership issue as well. Of course, I'm not saying that leadership is going to lead or drive change, but it's got to adopt to make it possible and show people that are working in universities that it's expected of them that they adopt to these changes and find new ways of allowing people to learn in enhanced environments. So that was that part, and then the second part. So perhaps somebody else would like to say something about the evaluation and learning to test and so on.
I would say that assessment and evaluation methods have to change in university, have to be more open for new things, a new way of assessing learning among students. That will involve, of course, all the new media ways. And I think then students will find learning in the higher education even more interesting for them and more useful. But we have a problem with the digital competence of our teachers in university. They are afraid that they don't know enough to let students use this. And they don't know also if, how can they check that they didn't find these things somewhere else, that they were their own thoughts and so on, That's a lot of plagiarism. How do you find that? Other pictures and all the other things that they use, are they okay to use? Are they maybe somebody else's property? And there are lots of issues and questions around this. And still, when they come out in society, as I'm at the Royal Institute of Technology, they're becoming civil engineers, they have to be good in presentation techniques, they have to know how to sell themselves and their products and their ideas, And if they're never trained in that at university, how can we expect them to do that when they come out? And also, the teachers need to learn a bit about presentation techniques. They didn't learn that. They are good in their subjects, But it's not so easy to get them to sit down and actually think about these things. Or some have a natural talent, but most of us don't. There's also another thing. I think that students are students' possibilities to add content to the courses and to come with some knowledge and into the class. That's something that is overlooked a lot at university level. You're not thinking that here we got a lot of individuals, maybe 60 or 100 individuals listening to you that have their own experiences and their own ideas, and they could contribute to the course. And that's something that is not used in the full way, where I think that assessment methods and evaluation methods, if they change, that would be much easier.
Two comments. I think, personal experience and what I think is true for most, assessment drives learning. You do what you're expected to do. So, and I just noticed that there's very little discussion about assessment in this type of conferences. So that's just one comment. The other comment is all these new tools that we see that everybody's using. It's the same, working for a company that our IT department isn't keeping up, and we are expected as professionals to use these tools and grab a Dropbox account if we don't have the possibility to exchange files. If the IT department doesn't help us, we are expected to find and use the tools. That's a change in how we look at tools and who should provide us with the tools. So I think I guess we need to prepare the students in the world that they will come out to. It's not going to be served to them. They need to be able to be flexible and use these different tools, and that should be part of education. And I also noticed one of the speakers, the keynotes, mentioning there's some romantic ideas about these tools that they will somehow magically transform education, and I think that they won't. They are personal, important tools for you as a person, and then it depends on the context and how it's being used, if they add any value to education.
Following up a little bit on what you said there, Patrik, I spoke to one of the participants yesterday, which expressed she expressed a feeling of being in the hands of technology, and that there are also, not only, this was a university teacher, but also we have examples in schools, which we mentioned earlier during this conference, of schools almost being forced into buying technology without getting the the much needed support to actually use them. And we heard examples of smartboards being used only for projecting presentations and all that sorts of thing. What do you think of that notion, and who should take the responsibility to make sure that the teachers on all levels feel secure enough to use these tools without feeling that the tools shape their teaching rather than the other way around? Maybe you can start off by one of the persons behind tools. So Patrik, what do you?
I know the Swedish curricula for gymnasium and grundskolan, and it's part of the curricula. You're supposed to introduce these tools to the students, and I mean that's the way it's designed, and please do it. That's my only comment. And of course, if it's not happens, it's a leadership issue. Do we need more training, or do we need kind of motivation, or do we need to force people to some extent to add this? But it's actually already part of the curricula to include this. And I think we're far ahead, because if you listen to the discussion in the US right now, they talk about 21st century
21st century learning.
21st century learning, and that's what we've been doing always. It's about creativity and being able to collaborate. We've already built that into our curricula, like in the 90s. So in that way, we're far ahead, and we should just keep implementing the good thoughts we already have there, I think. So.
Any more thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of educators are quite paranoid about technology, but I think that I think it was Marshall McLuhan said, "What we create our tools, and then our tools create us." And we got to really embrace that fact and acknowledge it. I mean, you look at these little horses, how they've become celebrated, but they were a tool that was indispensable for those mines and for agriculture and everything. And people became identified with their tools, and proudly in many cases. But we have this, this idea that, I'm not technologically driven. Well, that's crazy. You drove to work in a car. You're technologically driven in a literal sense, and it's going to permeate throughout life. I just think we need next generation teachers, we need next generation exams, we need next generation evaluation systems, and it can get a bit depressing thinking of all this, but we are in a complex system, and I guess we do need to see the innovators, the thousand gardens, sort of blooming, but we also need to, be brave and start thinking of systematic changes that we can make happen.
Yeah, I wanted to know if anybody has a good answer for how do we get the people who are taught and trained in very traditional universities where you have to know everything, and if you can't answer every question, you lose face, and losing face is a really bad thing. Because I think that's what lies behind most of the tech fear in university teachers. Many people want to do things, but even those who do it and are the front runners tend to sort of do it and think they weren't supposed to, so they just won't tell anybody, which is a real shame. So how do we get over that one?
I don't think there are any really easy answers, as you realise, to a question like that. But it's occurred to me occasionally when I've been speaking to lecturers here who have experienced year after year of students coming from other cultures, perhaps from China or from India or somewhere else, where there's been a more authoritative way of looking at teachers and what teachers say, and examinations have more or less consisted of being able to repeat what the lecturer has said. And but that if you look at the way things are moving in India or in China, I don't think that we could say there's any real opposition between that type of authoritarian teaching and a lack of response to new technology. So I don't think the two need to lock in all that much. But on the other hand, I can't. We've got these late adopters. We've got plenty of them all over the place, and I think there too that management has to do something creative to get people enthusiastic, to get the people that are enthusiastic together with those that aren't so enthusiastic, and get them into some sort of personal commitment to rejuvenating their teaching. And that's got to do a lot about the individualistic modes of teaching that are still dominant in at least in Swedish universities, perhaps in most universities. So getting people to work together, I think, is one of the keys to this.
I agree. I think teaching teams is the thing, you know, to form teams, and everybody isn't good at everything.
Yeah.
So you have to not only choose the tools that are good for the situation, but you have to also choose the persons that are good for the situation, you know. Some are extremely good in lecturing and they don't need any equipment at all, and everybody will listen, and it's fantastic, and you really feel that you learned a lot in that lecture. And others hate the situation, but are very good in maybe evaluating knowledge that students have acquired. And so why, you know, everything is needed. It's just to find the place, you know.
And in the spirit of that, this is really like a newscaster trying to desperately find something to move on to the next subject. But everything is needed. If you've had the opportunity to already see the short interview we had with Terry Anderson, which is on YouTube right now, from 2 days ago, Terry, you mentioned that we have to be smarter in mixing online and face-to-face learning, and realizing that this is a very, very difficult question, but can spark some interesting discussions. How do you reach that point? How do you recognize what a smart mix of face-to-face and online learning is?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most fundamental things we have to realize is that students' time is becoming more and more valuable. We used to take that for granted, that they were here for 2 years or 4 years or whatever. And at least in North America, our students are working 10, 20, 30 hours at the grocery store or whatever, and that they're starting to realize that you know, I've got to be more strategic about managing my own time. And if we're going to waste their time by doing things that are more productively done in an asynchronous mode or at a time-shifted way, I think they're just going to become more, our lecture theaters are going to become more and more empty. They will find other ways to learn that. And I think that's a good thing, because I think we have to teach our students and experience ourselves, you know, how to learn smarter and learn faster and learn better. And it isn't, I don't think it's impossible, and how do you actually do it? I think you have to do some fairly systematic trials and pilots, and try it this way for 6 months and that way for another time. And, you know, just try to keep systematically evolving to find that right balance, because I don't think anybody knows what the right balance is right now. I mean, we know that 100% lecturing with no media at all is not very effective. We know that 100% asynchronous, there's many students who can't pace themselves and are not capable right now anyways, and maybe never will be. So it's going to be something in the middle, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work out.
I think, if I can just say a few words about it, I think face-to-face is a very interesting concept, because by that people, I think, generally mean that they're physically present, but it appears to me that being face-to-face on the internet, actually using the simple technologies, or simple technologies to use anyway, that are presented by video conferencing systems, Adobe Connect that we use and similar, makes the face-to-face context makes such a difference, actually, and allows the social dimension of education to bloom actually better than in many physical campus situations. You get actually closer, but you have to see the person you're talking to, in my experience. And obviously that not all the time and not on every occasion, but to have that opportunity communicate in real time with teachers, with knowledgeable others, with your student comrades and so on, is, I think, it more or less eradicates the huge distinction between campus and distance. Yeah. So, you know, I think finding the right mix of that is part of the solution anyway.
And connected to face-to-face, maybe shifting in the definition of what is face-to-face, much thanks to technology, of course. You always get back, or you often get back to saying that higher education and society as a whole has changed a lot during the past years. But how do you think higher education will look in say 2032 or 20 years from now, and compared to the development over the past 20 years?
Wow. Well, if I would have the choice, I'll think about my kids, I guess. So they probably want to travel. So why not a university in a nice warm place? Friends is important, so they'll probably go where they know others have gone. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's going to be different things rather than just the closest university that is going to drive that, because there's a big curiosity for moving around in the world, and I guess we need to find our exclusive things here in Sweden to make sure that they either stay or people come from other countries to our universities. So.
I started work at this university about 20 years ago, so I know what things were like then. We didn't have emails and computers. There was one small, or two, perhaps three small Macs in a special room that was kept locked, and that was about it. Otherwise, we were still using the old methylated spirits, copying machines, but. So a lot has happened in the last 20 years, but I think even more is going to happen in the next 20 years. I think the acceleration rate is increasing, not only in technology, but as we know, that's doubled every year during the last 20 years or so. But it's also accelerating in the adoption of this technology. Although sometimes these processes are deceptively slow. Some things go very fast. I think somebody was showing us the adoption of mobile devices. Was it you, perhaps, the other day? It was somebody showing us the increase in the adoption of mobile devices, and not only in the Western world, over the whole of Africa and India and everywhere. People have got mobile phones, and often with better connectivity than we have here in Sweden in some parts anyway. So this has been amazingly fast. At the same time, there are some very, very unmovable structures that are very difficult to move. We heard Charles Crook speaking yesterday about the 3-year experience of the university experience. And I'm wondering what's going to happen to that in the next 20 years. Is it going to be the same type of reserve as the public boarding school is today? I think it might be. I think it's going to develop into a sort of a socially exclusive identity forming experience for those that can really afford it, that can afford that amount of money and the time to put into that experience. And obviously they will have the same advantages from it as the people that go to Eton or Lundsberg or somewhere like that. Getting the networks, getting the right attitudes, the right manners of speech and clothing and so on. So I think that may be the future for the campus universities.
Hey. I know I have some arms now.
I'm wondering, thinking of what we have discussed so far. I mean, those are things which we already have known for several years. I mean, everything what you have already said. And also with the question about what will happen in the universities in 25, 30 years. Of course, we can think a lot about that, and we have all our personal reflections on that. But actually there are already studies about that. For example, IPTS, who is the research institute for European Union. they have written and they have come up with a lot of things what will happen in 25, 30 years. The same, it is the same with UNESCO and OECD, for example. They also have a lot of what will going on in 25, 30 years. So what's really the barriers? Why don't we know what we have to do and we know the way forward? And we can also see what's happened for the movement with UR University, for example. Continents as Africa and Asia, they are just straight on the way. So why are we so slow here in the Western countries? And why are we so slow in Sweden? I mean, we have everything on the table right now. What are the barriers for us? We discussed that a bit with the lady yesterday from the moderate party. And Sweden is known as a country which have a very high educational level. We have a high IT knowledge, and we have had it for a long time, and also with democracy. So what are really the barriers, and what are your reflections about that? Why don't we move further on or faster, or is it a culture barrier?
Well, I think generally the member of parliament said too, what did she say, the 1100-year track record, it isn't going to go away. And I think that sense that universities have had something to protect and to not change, despite all of the distractions of life and the technologies, which some people see as distractions instead of really powerful learning tools and teaching tools, which they are. But you have to marry that with the sense that that we have a mission to to hold on and to resist those kind of changes. I think that creates such a tension that it's hard to talk about 20 or 25 years. And the research that people do, it's our capacity to look into the future has not been much of a track record in the past. But just one final comment is there's an old story that and it isn't at this university, but that senior leadership at universities is predominantly or a huge influence by geologists who rise to positions of power, and the reason is that they're the only ones who can really understand the speed of change.
I want to pick up on the Eton commentary, and it's probably quite true, and just an example from so we're here in Dalarna. Very consciously, you do distance learning, and it's a long way to go here. I drove here myself, and it was I had a lot of problems getting here, but then I went to Copenhagen Business School, and they strategically, deliberately has decided not to do distance learning. And of course they're situated in a nice place. Probably each Danish kid dreams about going and living for a few years in Copenhagen. It's a nice place. So I guess we'll see that there are some, and you see a lot of city universities, and I think that's probably the right decision to use the attractions you have. And if you don't have the most attractive city, then of course distance learning is going to be a really, really important part of how you run your university.
You're saying Tallinn is not an exciting
maybe I should be leaving now, I don't know.
I quite agree with you. I think that's like KTH in Stockholm also. They say, well, distance learning is not really for us, and not realizing what potential there is in the mix, really, to take the best of both. But I also think apprenticeship is going to be very, very popular, to the master and the apprentice, to be able to be near a master and learn from just him scaffolding you or looking at what he's doing. I think that's going to be something that has not been of much value, and that you'll pay maybe quite a lot of money or use your contacts to be able to be in that position. And also I would say that campus studies has a value. It's a network that you often bring with you for many years. I mean, your whole life. You get a lot of your business contacts actually happens when you're at campus. So it's an important thing also to be at the campus for some time. It doesn't necessarily have to be for 5 years, but maybe for a year or two. And I think that will still be important. And also we have to think about that people who are training today in university, they'll probably have 4 or 5 or 10 different jobs, completely different careers during their lifetime. You can't expect them to go to university and take a certificate for each one of these. There has to be on lifelong learning, so learning is going to be completely different. It's going to be a natural part of your life all the time, and everybody's going to expect that from you. And so we must, maybe if we're going to stay as a university, I mean, research will still be done somewhere, so why shouldn't it be done in a university or whatever we will call it? But also this must be open to take adult learners who are actually wanting to retrain in some part, and maybe not for 3 years and not on campus.
I have a question up here.
Yes, or a little protest. Aren't you looking back to this small, cozy campus with education of gentlemen with good background, etc.? I think of the huge international mass education needs. I think of our own needs of leveling up the level of education. We are far behind Finland, for example, in educational attainment, and we have extremely low education levels in some regions, etc. These things are not going to be solved by us comforting ourselves with that there will still be some nice campuses, etc. I think campuses will be a little everywhere, and also receiving a lot of education from all over the place, etc. And which place will not be a learning place, etc. Don't you have visions for scaling up everything? Isn't that an important thing about the future also? And they can't be squeezed into our existing campuses, I'm sure of that.
Comments on that?
Well, that has to also do with, we have to be, as universities or higher education institutions, we have to be able to evaluate what people really know already. Doesn't matter where they learned it or how they learned it. So I think that's the differs us from a lot of other institutions, is actually that we can accredit what they know. And that's something that can still keep us going if we want to. You know. But of course, a lot of things, I mean, look at the developing countries, what's happening there. And look at how researchers and students, everybody, how we have, the world is small, you know. It's a village today. We have no problem having contacts and colleagues all over the world. Sometimes it's even good in projects. You can work 24 hours around because always somebody is awake, you know, can continue what you just left off. And businesses uses this a lot.
You know, continuing what both of the prior speakers have said, I think we must realise that the skills that the next 20 or 30 years are going to require are the type of skills that you learn in a university education, the type of skills on learning how to learn independently, being able to define the questions you need to ask, and being able to find the answers, the solutions, or the next row of questions. And so what it's going to mean is that educating only 30 or 40% of the population up to university level is not going to be enough. We've got to do it in terms of 70, 80, or everyone really. It's got to be mass education at this level. And how is it going to be done? Well, it's not going to be done by 3 years of people staying on campuses, that's for sure. And it's not going to be done that way in the emerging economies in Africa or Asia either. So obviously this has got to happen. And the question is, how do we do it? We can't just lock ourselves into these ivory towers and just pretend that nothing's happening.
I have a question up here.
I have two questions that I'm seeking for the answer. I thought they are quite well related to the future, or how we are going to foresee whether it is there or not. One is that I would say, are we going to, in the future, that become customer or students or pupil-centered learning or teaching sort of the environment there? The question is that, what we see now, maybe traditional education is that we see because it's teacher-led training or teaching sort of things there. And maybe in the future, because, no matter it's lifelong learning or web-based learning or whatever there, and we think that because learner wants to say, I want to learn something. And then, of course, they seek learning resources, and then they try to somehow, with the help of guidance, and then they will get things organized, learning resources organized, and then we see, okay, now I start learn. Of course, if we could provide professional assessment on the result of that, or maybe this learner would get a kind of certificate from a sort of education institute there. So this is one question about future. The other is nowadays this is particularly a situation in UK, I thought, because in UK that their tuition fee is increasing again, and then students come to university and say, okay, I pay for my service. I do not. I mean, you are saying, okay, I'm going to educating you or educate you. No, I receive service from our teachers at university. So, in the future, do you think that we are teaching students, or we are like a government provide services to our students, like government provide services to our citizens, like that? So.
Yeah, I certainly think I can see it happening in this university where we are already we've got the first cohort of fee-paying students this year, and we're certainly thinking more in terms of a customer relationship, being able to provide the type of services perhaps a customer might require, having a more holistic view of the student situation. So I can certainly see that trend here. But whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not quite sure yet.
Well, in North America, we've had a long tradition of fee-paying students, and it isn't the end of the world. I mean, it's sort of you establish a relationship with those persons as clients, as it's sort of maybe. Well, we don't pay for doctors in Canada, but in the U.S. they certainly do. And the doctor doesn't tell you just what you want to hear. He's expected to have some skills and to be able to guide you in reaching your objectives. But you have your part to pay, and they have their part to pay. So, and just a quick comment. The first question, I didn't quite get where the question was, but I think one of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking was is it teacher-led or is it student-led? And I guess again, I think it is almost a contractual kind of relationship. I think there is a place. It's sort of like blaming a symphony for being conductor-led, as if that's an evil kind of thing. But it's a relationship that those players enter into with somebody who can do this part of it and somebody else can do that part. And then those roles don't need to be never changing and sort of really hierarchical roles, but there are different roles, different skill sets that you have that I don't have, and it might flip around in another context or another position. So I don't think it's that challenging to move to more respectful relationships without losing one's identity as a student or as a teacher.
You touched earlier on international students and globalization and the world as a small village, and also Africa and Asia. E-learning has in many projects been seen as an important tool for the Western world, maybe to help educate and help developing countries achieve a higher success rate or educational level. What roles do you think that e-learning will have in developing countries? Maybe Andrew can start off.
Yeah,
I'll get a lower salary after today.
Sure. I think they'll have a massive role. I think, and not perhaps so much in just helping developing countries, but being able to be part of their development. I think that's a very important distinction. It's not an aid issue really. It's a question of academic collaboration, which is made so much more simple, so much more accessible. We don't have to fly and change planes and spend days and use lots of carbon or emit lots of carbon and so on. And it's scalable. Everybody can do it. And it's simple techniques. All we need really is a reasonable bandwidth in connection with these countries, and that's there in quite a lot of examples. It's just a matter of getting on there and getting it done now. And this means that what we can do here on the internet, in the term of net courses, we can do together with universities in any country. And this would mean that we can exchange expertise, we can get students working together to be able to understand each other's perspectives on the world and each other's conditions. I can see a fantastic potential in this for international development and growth, and for keeping up, and for learning about what's happening in these continents about which we know so very little at the moment.
I met a guy in Pearson. I mean, it's a huge company, and you always meet interesting people. But his job was to figure out how we deliver training to the poorest people, and I think that's defined as people who make less than $2 per day. So, obviously, that's a big challenge in terms of delivery to be able to deliver that. But one project that we have done with Nokia is that you use the mobile telephone to download content, more rich content. And most, even remote villages, often have a TV, just a normal TV screen, and then Nokia created a special cable to connect from the mobile phone to the TV, and they could have a more rich kind of content distributed in a very cheap way. So I mean, it's about it's a huge difference in the kind of resources in many places. And we have to be creative about the delivery model in that case.
I think we're already seeing technology make a huge difference in terms of higher education. Look at the open universities, the mega universities around the world, and they will be enhanced by new technologies. But there's hundreds of millions of people who are being educated by postal system delivered books, and when they get enhanced, I heard a story from South Africa where the university was sending out either supplements or course packages and to school teachers in remote areas, but they had no tradition of going to the post office because they never got any mail. Mm-hmm. So these things would sit in the post office for a few weeks, and then they would get shipped back, and the university would have to pay postage both ways. And so then all of a sudden they started texting people on their mobiles to go to the post office. Yeah. And sure enough, there was the technology solved the problem.
Yeah. Okay, a question up here.
Talking about supporting developing regions, it is said that one of the main issues they face is affordability, the affordability factor. So what is the best strategy for making next generation learning free and open?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I would be a zillionaire and wouldn't be sitting here. But if you can look at the successful Web 2.0 companies up to including Google itself, they didn't have revenue models. Twitter still doesn't have a revenue model, and there is a maybe naive assumption that just capturing enough eyeballs is enough, And I guess I'm not as worried about that we have a rock solid business case. From day one, I think that's part of our R&D as an organization is in spending some money to try to develop different models, and I guess a hope and a prayer that they will be effective enough so both the public and the private the students as consumers will find value in it. The government will find value in it for what it does to the society, and maybe we'll be selling advertisements on the back of our textbooks. It's that's what drives television, so it could drive education too.
It was just a comment, turning the aid to developing countries around, really. Actually, I find that one of the most interesting sources of good ideas for things you can use in education comes from people who do solutions for e-learning in Africa. And I work in a humanities department, we have no money ever for anything, especially not technology. So actually picking up the great ideas from e-learning in Africa usually brings on innovative stuff, doesn't need big system, and it's cheap or free. So
I mean, obviously at a conference like this, you are in some cases preaching for the choir, but we have heard some maybe critical voices during this conference. For instance, in Charles Crook's keynote, he mentioned a few pointers that maybe points to the fact that there's a few not so positive effects of implementing educational technology. What do you see are the potential pitfalls in implementing educational technology, and how can we ensure that we would try to not fall into them? And I'll turn first to Patrik.
Right. Wow. I think the integrity question, of course, and security becomes issues that we didn't have to think about before. And just listening to the presentation about the chat being analyzed, whether it's social or
about that too.
That raises a lot of questions. What will people? How will they react to this? But then again, we change our perception of how much integrity we actually expect and need. So it's difficult to know where that is going. Most likely, we don't need that much. We're happy to be open about certain things. Security might be a bigger problem, I think, if we scale up. I mean, we talked about scale before. We have 9 million students on our MyLabs mastering programs around the world, getting online and training. So of course, security is really, really important when people are being assessed and that information is being used to give them a degree. So security becomes a big issue, I think.
I just, on this issue of the potential pitfalls, picking up on the point the lady just there made about what we can learn from African schools and how they're managing to use new technologies at low cost or no cost. And this seems very important because obviously the whole e-learning agenda is a big business. I mean, you've only got to go to the BET show in London and you realise it's a huge business. And David Buckingham's written in quite an interesting way about this. And so companies have a vested interest not only in selling technologies to school, but once they've sold the technology, then they're quite clever at tying schools into service contracts. So they're basically technological tie-in, and they constantly have to go back to update the software, buy-in service, support services, etc. Now, obviously, that is highly problematic, especially where you have an education system where financial resources aren't necessarily evenly distributed. So, how, in your sort of opinion, how can schools, or as a community, how can the sort of higher education sector sort of resist the sort of commercial agenda that is really important? Obviously, it creates a lot of great new innovative technologies, but it seems as a community, the HE sector needs to sort of resist that to a degree, or put up some sort of opposition to ensure that smaller institutions don't sort of get crippled by the need to keep constantly buy all the new latest technology.
I could perhaps just say a few words about that. That's a very interesting point, and I think it's an issue of education and experience. I think that the people that work in the schools or the educational institutions need to be able to know enough to be able to say, no, we don't want that, we don't need that. What we need is something simpler than you're offering. Please scale it down. Please take all those funny bits out of it that we don't need. We just want this simple technology, and we definitely don't need all your service contracts. And so you know, it's that authority which is based on a knowledge of what we're doing, and that means training people and getting them to work together.
And maybe once more learning from developing countries, using the equipment that the kids or the students already have, like the phone, and work with that. And because they will definitely have something in their pocket instead of...
that could be passing the buck, because then every student's expected to have that latest mobile phone to stay competitive. So the problem doesn't just end.
No, it doesn't. And also Google is coming now with a new product that's going to be very cheap, they say, very cheap, small computer that everything is in the cloud anyway. Well, there are no free lunches, so I'm just wondering what's in it.
What's the hook?
What's the hook?
But
and Pearson's are giving away a lot of things as well, learning management systems.
Yeah,
and they want us to put all the content in there.
Yeah, I mean, you're happy to do that, and
so there's no free lunches here either, I'm sure.
No.
Don't be evil. That's
right.
Exactly.
We have part of our values. Be decent is part of our.
Okay.
So it's more or less the same. Google
pretty much the same, which is important when you're in the educational industry. But there is no free lunches, and. You're referring to open class, I guess.
Exactly.
But the business model there is that you will be able to add content to your system. So there's a lot of instructors that want to have a choice of what material they use for teaching, and that's a very it's a long tradition. People choose what book they want to work on, and this is just a delivery model for being able to choose what kind of online content you want to work with. So it's basically carrying over the kind of traditional book model into a digital one. But another reflection to these devices, and it's a difficult question, the democracy issue of, you know, should we supply or should we not supply? But what happens in many places in Sweden now, that municipalities do these one-to-one laptop programs. So there was someone sent in to the local newspaper in Kungälv, where I live, saying it's such a waste of money because I already had a laptop and the school gave me another one, and now I have two, and a mobile phone as well. So it's kind of a waste of resources in one way, and of course then democracy is important too. So I guess there's no easy model to manage that, but it's definitely a waste to have two laptops.
I guess I think we have to realize that higher education has been a business for a long time, and we've been offloading a lot of money to our students to buy Pearson textbooks, amongst other things, and we spend money on lights and heating and libraries, and we have now opportunities to shift that around to, you know, just to say, you know, is you know, making all our books digital. You know, does that have compelling cost advantages? And if we don't do that, because we have some nostalgic feeling about being able to hold paper ourselves, then we're being just as negligent as buying into service contracts. You know, we're really buying things for making decisions for other people that we probably shouldn't be doing. So it is a business. It has been a business, and it will be a business, I think.
I would like to actually continue on what you said about kids or youth having a lot of these devices already, and through that weave in a question we got sent in, or I got sent to me for this closing panel. Being born in the 80s, I did not grow up with internet, but I am somewhat of a gamer. I've been into the World of Warcraft scene and quickly out again because I got addicted, maybe. I realized it. But one person emailed us, and he's read the book A New Culture of Learning by Thomas and Celia Brown, where they push the concept of gamification in the style of World of Warcraft and those massive collaborative worlds. And could the panelists maybe comment on those types of phenomenons, and if you see any potential there in using those models for teaching or learning?
I think we can learn a lot from games and the way games are constructed. Why do you get hooked on a game? You know, the reward system and all, you know, that it's sort of getting more and more difficult, starting at a low level and then going higher. I think that all this, the way of constructing a game, I think we have a lot to learn from that. And then I don't think it only we have to think about games that's actually virtual games or digital games, but also the old games like we tried today, Monopoly or Oriopoly. I mean, that works fine for getting the discussion going. And also there is, when you place a game on a table or on internet, it's like sort of relaxes people a bit. And it's sort of, a game is fun in the conception is fun, even if the learning will be hard. So it can open up a lot of things that you wouldn't see.
I had a discussion with Oscar just at lunch, and probably it's like the discussion around simulation, that it needs to be a balanced part of the curriculum. If you'd be very, think that you can create the whole educational experience around a game, you probably can, but then it's a very isolated and packaged approach, and once you get out of that kind of gaming experience, you're out in real life, and you need to learn by yourself, basically. There's no game stimulating you to learn. But of course, difficult concepts and motivation probably can be helped by that, but we need to create lifelong learners, and games probably don't do that. I'm not sure, but probably need to have a lot more tools and a more balanced curriculum for that.
Isn't it the reverse that's true, really, that World of Warcraft and similar games with their levels of access and their proficiency and so on, and the struggle for power and so on is really based on academic research rather than the other way around?
I don't know, but I think a lot of you have played SimCity. You can learn a lot from SimCity or all the sim programs, Yeah.
I'd just like to also comment on the OER Opoly that Ebba played. For me, it was the best session, and I think we all thought that. The few of us who were there, but it's in fact, it would be great if you rolled it out on the way so people can take a look at the board on the way out. But it's a phenomenal way to engage people in learning in a very productive and easy way. And the irony of it, of course, is it's pushing getting away from copyright. And I would love to take a copy of that home, but it's copyright to Parker Brothers, who owns Monopoly, and so you can't even sort of struggle against the evil empire without without violating the laws. That's a very interesting dilemma. But I think games are, we've been playing games throughout our human history. It's a part of our way of most effectively learning, and I think we've trivialized it in higher education.
Just, I would like to ask all of you, really, what is your main takeaway from this conference? We're starting off by Terry being the closest to me.
well, the Monopoly game is for me, it's going to be very useful in my practice. So. And for changing our university, because I think OERs have tremendous potential, but there is a vast amount of ignorance about what is out there in our faculty. They just haven't seen the stuff that is available.
Patrik?
Well, I like the sessions. There were a couple of them that had the that were actually looking at evidence-based, video filming, teachers using technology, and those kind of that kind of research I think is really, really valuable. And one, because we need to learn what is effective, but also because that's probably the only way to convince other teachers is by showing what is effective and what is not effective. I mean, that's probably key in driving the implementation of this that we all kind of want to happen. I think that kind of evidence-based, the facts about what works and what doesn't work in terms of technology, that's key, and it's interesting to see that. I also like the part about, because there are some romantic ideas about Web 2.0, and I do work with commercial software, and I do think we have some real interesting values in the kind of systems that I work with. So to me, it's we will be using these tools, but there are also some romantic ideas about it, that it's just going to make things better. I mean, I do use all these Web 2.0 tools myself, and I think they should go hand in hand with some commercial tools. So those are my two key takeaways that I kind of was new to me at this conference.
Could more evidence of e-learning's efficiency be one way to convince politicians to really give the necessary support for next generation learning or technology enhanced learning or whatever you call it, or is it something else that is needed to convince them that this is something that you need to put some money in or invest in, whether it's time or money?
Well, if you're asking me, I think so, and I think it's not only not only to show it to each other, but to show it to the teachers who are not yet very convinced about technology. So it can be part of professional development to share kind of the research about ICT and effectiveness in education.
Margareta, just continuing on takeaways.
We have an opening. We were actually invited to take the whole utbildningsutskottet, which is part of the government, and show them what e-learning is about, and that there will be more people who experience this and see that it's actually quality learning and that things are happening and that it's interesting and that students are happy with this methods. And I think that is a very, very fortunate opening, and we must take that chance. So that's with the politics. If you come to what I bring back that I really found interesting and little new for me, was that actually this living and learning in this black box world. That session was really good, because you hardly ever think about these issues, like what is actually in those black boxes like this that I use all the time, and what happens with learning when that becomes so much part of our lives, all of us. And I thought that was a great one. Also, of course, the Oreopoly, I was there and it's lovely. I knew about it, and I thought that games are something that we should bring in more, even on higher education level. I believe we missed out on that. It sort of hasn't been serious enough or whatever. I don't know. But if it works, it works. And then, Terry, your presentation, I really enjoyed it, because I was sort of ticking off everything I've done since, 2009 I started this next generation learning course, which is you can enroll whenever you want, so you start every week. It's not like the tradition, you have your own pace, you choose your pace, you can go on doing it until you're finished. And I have all these other things that you said we should do. I felt okay. I didn't know about them, but they were fine. So this often happens when you go to conferences, that you really feel good because you're on the right track. And I think that's very important for all of us. And then, of course, it's like all the conversations you have in between. They're always the most important ones, you know. So I hope we can do this again. Maybe in 2 years' time, another one.
Maybe.
International, but also before then, I hope we can do something more like I train teachers from primary school to teacher trainers, and all in the same classes, 650 of them, blogging about their learning and so on, all the time, and it's quite fun. It's very fun. I learn a lot from my students. And teach meets are very popular in schools. And also this unconference is coming big up. And I think that we could actually use that to meet, and it doesn't have to be this conference where we come there, we have subjects we want to discuss with our colleagues in other places, you know, and see what they have done around something. And I think to learn from each other, that's needed more often. Maybe at least every 6 months we should have some meetings like that. So that's what I hope for.
Yeah, perfect. Andrew.
Yeah, well, I've taken a lot away from this conference, not least all the impromptu meetings that we've had with new acquaintances, and a lot of the marvelous presentations we've had during these days. But there's one quote that I'd be able to use anyway as a real takeaway, and that was from Satish Patel. I'm not quite sure how original it was this morning, but I thought it was very good. He said that teachers can't be replaced by computers, but teachers who can be replaced by computers should be.
Yes, yes, they should.
And that teachers who don't use computers should be replaced by those who do. So, I think that contains quite a few interesting thoughts. He also refreshed out some ideas I'd had earlier about how teachers use time and how conscious they are of using their time. And I think that may be one of the central issues that we have to look at in the future, and that we're very unconscious of in the present day. And that's got nothing specifically to do with ICT, but it's driven by the use of ICT in teaching. And I think that's something that we'll certainly be looking at in the future. So we'll take that with us as well.
So I would just like to say, for myself, a warm thank you for everyone who came here, and we will probably take you up on that, Margareta, and have another conference and also other activities to make sure that this is not only a one-time type thing. So thank you very much, and until we meet again.